now, let me welcome our next panel of speakers that we have here right now. Our session, which is now going to be equally interesting, is where we will be talking about Mumbai's real estate asset classes and growing investors' appetite. So let's talk about finance and investments. And let me welcome our moderator of the session, Mr. Neeraj Bansal, partner and CEO, India Global KPMG in India. Neeraj Bansal is a senior partner with over 23 years of professional experience. He holds a strong relationship with member firms across ASEAN, HK, and Taiwan, with a focus on growing inbound and outbound business operations, and has played the role of a market maker through collaboration with ASEAN and Hong Kong member firms. He has extensive experience serving global clients in the IT, BPM, and service industry, delivering broad range of solutions addressing various risks and scalability requirements. So this was our eminent moderator for this session. Let me now welcome our speakers of the session, introducing in an alphabetical order. We regret Mr. Ambar Maheshwari from India Post Asset Management will not be able to join us, but we hope he will be able to join somewhere in the discussion later on. Moving on to our next eminent panel member who is here with us, Mr. Amit Goenka, MD and CEO, Nisus Finance. Amit Goenka, as part of the advisory board of the funds managed by Nisus Finance, has spearheaded the growth and corporate governance of the fund pools, the NBFC, and the advisory services of Nisus Finance. Besides the two funds under management, he's launching a special situations fund to address the legacy stressed assets in real estate with a fund corpus of about INR 500 crores. Amit Goenka brings over 23 years of top-tier multinational experience in banking, direct investments, and strategy, and has been responsible for over $7 billion of transactions worldwide. Our next eminent panel member, I introduce Mr. Jayesh Karya, founder and managing partner, Artis Business Advisors. A fellow chartered accountant of ICAI, Jayesh Karya has more than 25 years of experience with Big Four consulting firms, PwC, Deloitte, and KPMG in business advisory, transaction advisory, business reorganizations and restructuring, cross-border investments and acquisitions, international taxation, fund structuring, capital and fundraising, real estate, construction, and infrastructure advisory, to name a few. Our next eminent panel member, let me introduce Mr. Puneet Bhatia, Senior Director, ICICI Venture Funds Management Company Limited. Puneet Bhatia has more than 25 years of diversified experience across investment banking, private equity, lending, and structured finance in Indian real estate. Prior to joining ICICI Venture, he was director and head investments at Mirae Global Investments. Puneet is also fellow of RICS. Our next and final eminent member, let me introduce Mr. Ritesh Vora, partner and head real estate, Investcorp India Asset Managers Private Limited. Ritesh has been a financier, advisor, and entrepreneur over the course of his real estate career and has been associated with a number of property developments across India. He moved to Investcorp in early 2019 and heads the real estate funds management business for India. His primary focus is on building and managing the real estate asset classes, and again, he is also a member of RICS. So this is our eminent panel for the discussion today. I now request our moderator, Mr. Neeraj Bansal, to take over the proceedings.
Thank you very much, Sapna. Am I audible well, Sapna?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, wonderful. So good afternoon, everyone. Pleasure to be with you today, and also a very, very warm welcome to all of you, and also my fellow panelists for this session. Thank you for investing your time with us on a Friday afternoon. I hope that the panel discussion is insightful and engaging for you. We'll do our best on that. We have an experienced panel of industry veterans, with us today. As Sapna mentioned, their the background around it, so they've got tons of experience to share with you. So we'll see that, on this topic that we have, Mumbai real estate asset classes, growing investors' appetite. We'll have a few questions around the real estate growth drivers and outlook, also in terms of prominent asset classes which are getting traction, the evolving trends around it, and also some challenges that are being faced by the industry as well. But before we dive into the panel discussion, I will try and kind of quickly set some context for the session as well. In terms of when you look at the pandemic slump that had happened from an economy point of view, that of course created a lot of extreme uncertainty and precariousness across various industry segments, with the real estate initially being one of the worst hit sectors. Mobility restriction, disrupted supply chains, and labor shortages, that all of us have been kind of, facing all through, created all those challenges. But real estate became a sector which started to kind of emerge out of those uncertainty in a faster way. And with the reopening of the markets and the strong economic revival that we are seeing currently in 2021, the sector is, showing a lot of strong confidence from the investors, and also with the increase in investments that we're seeing in the real estate sector across different asset classes there. Commercial real estate has also been one of the few resilient segments, and residential projects is certainly showing signs of revival there. If you look at the private equity deals in India, they've gained traction in the first half of 2021. We recorded almost like 786 deals compared to 681 in the first half of 2020. And in terms of deal value, we are observing a 5-year high with an accumulative value of almost $18 billion getting invested there. But we convert it into, let's say, focusing specifically on the real estate side of it, then the institutional investors have invested almost $3 billion in the Indian real estate sector in the first 9 months of the current year 2021, which is almost a 51% increase from the same period in the prior area there. Now, when we see this, the kind of surge that we're seeing in the activity in the sector, there are also some, I would say, relevant data points, across the different asset classes, which, may be just helpful to keep us in context around it, when we have the chat just in a minute more. In terms of India's net office absorption, it's standing at almost approximately 6 million square feet in the third quarter of 2021, which is the July to September period, which is an increase of 48% when compared to the previous quarter. And it's also reflecting a 8% year-on-year growth in the major cities aspect of it. When you moved it to a warehousing transactions aspect of it, then in the top 8 cities, the warehousing transaction would almost double to 76 million square feet by March 2026 from the 32 billion square feet that we are currently seeing in 2021 there. Data centers is again an area that has been gathering a lot of interest. We'll touch upon it, during the panel as well. This is also an area where the industry expects to double its capacity by the end of 2023 from the current capacity that we have over there. So with this momentum that we're seeing in the sector across different asset classes, we'll proceed with our discussion and gather views from our experts in the panel today. And Ritesh, if I may come to you first, just to kind of get an overall perspective, some of the number that I was saying that that the real estate sector has garnered a lot of investment, private equity investment in the first 9 months around it. Given the robust vaccination drive that we're seeing right now, we just crossed $1 billion of doses as well, and the fact that the economy is kind of getting opened up in a very rapid way now. Do you see the investment momentum to continue in a similar manner? Do we see a higher growth towards the next 6 months?
So, thanks, Rich. Good afternoon, everyone. So, I think numbers are $1 billion in the first 9 months of this year. Relative to last year, of course, this number is higher. But if you look at the average that we were getting, let's say between 2018-19, we were averaging somewhere around $6 odd billion for real estate investments specifically. So we are obviously much below that number. In a normal world, that number would have grown from 6 to maybe 8 or 9 by now. In all likelihood, we'll probably end the year at maybe 4 billion. So just looking at slightly backdated data, we're probably at about 50% of where we should have been, or at 2/3 of where we were 2 years ago. So I think that's obviously a lot to do with the pandemic, and how that has slowed down things, how that was the disruptor for everyone. Of course, we've not seen that kind of disruption on the normal private equity side, where volumes are really growing in terms of transactions, investment activity. We've obviously not seen that on the stock market side, where the recovery has been very swift and robust. But real estate, it's the nature of the asset class. It goes down slowly, it comes back slowly. So we have to just deal with slightly longer cycles. But I think the fundamentals or the foundation for a good recovery, for economic transaction volumes to increase over the next few years are sort of getting in place. I think, the impact of the pandemic, again, no one knows the third wave, fourth wave, etc., but keeping all that aside, we are seeing office occupancies go up. We are seeing, the Nomura's business resumption index cross 100, after a long time. We've seen, the GDP numbers, we've seen, all the other things coming back, festive demands, all of those things. I think so, the general sort of sense on the economic recovery is there, seems to be robust. Residential sales have been quite good. We again had disruption in the second quarter of this year, but this last quarter has been, slowly getting back to normal volumes. The positive impact of some of the behavioral change is showing up in the investments that we are seeing on the warehousing sector, led by e-commerce demand. The positive impact is also showing up on the data center because they're just consuming that much more data. So I think like I said, I think the foundations are in place. The impact of the pandemic will be behind us, hopefully in short order. And we should start to see, greater transaction volumes, greater capital coming in across the real estate sectors. Maybe the sectoral mix will change. Some of these sectors like warehousing and data centers could end up attracting more than their fair share. And that's just how business cycles are. But I think on the whole, I would say, we are in reasonably decent shape for a good recovery. COVID surprises, being exception to that, or no one can really say what's going to happen on that front. But other than that, I think next year should be a good year.
And as a follow-up to that, since the topic today is also focused on Mumbai, there. So if you were to take a narrow focus, from Mumbai perspective, so how do you see the investment landscape shaping up, and what would drive the preference among investors? Currently, what we see is that at a broad level, that almost 40% of the investment that was raised during this 9 months was centered around Mumbai, and 20% was between Bangalore and Delhi, there. So how do you see the investment from a Mumbai perspective shaping up, if you were to take that narrow view on that?
So see, I think from a economic activity perspective, financial services, of course, is the core as far as Bombay is concerned. But equally, there is a fair bit of activity around tech and tech-related services also in Bombay and surrounding areas. So both of these sectors are seeing fairly good volumes in terms of capital coming in, stock markets. Again, there is a big wealth effect that people in Bombay feel with the stock market. I can see Amit smiling. Obviously, his portfolio is doing well. So I think that's that's going to reflect in people buying apartments. I mean, not a day goes by nowadays, right, when you're not reading about someone buying a 50 crore rupee apartment, 70 crore rupee apartment, whatever. So, and all of those things, act as force multipliers for people who are buying the 2 crore and 1 crore and 3 crore rupee apartments. So my sense is Bombay will see its fair share. There is no reason why it will not. And just the nature of the city is such, I guess we will see some activity hopefully around commercial, in terms of new investment activity. Residential is always there, but residential hasn't seen that much institutional investment come through for a variety of reasons, and that might continue. And also in the periphery, right, data centers, Bombay is, or surround MMR, I would say, is one of the key hubs along with Chennai. So hopefully that money should come there. So yeah, I would think, I know I'm giving a very generic answer, but Mumbai should see a reasonable share of these volumes coming through.
Sure. Thanks, Hitesh. And Puneet, if I may get you in here, your views on the investment landscape, from general as well as from specifically from Mumbai perspective, and also if you could give us a little bit of sense in terms of that how do you see the allocation amongst the asset classes? Is it going to change significantly given the pressures that we saw in the commercial real estate space?
So let me first thank Realty Plus and Sapna and for the opportunity to be part of this panel. It's good to be amongst friends. I mean, actually, everyone at the panel I've known for so many years now, and good to have. So, I mean, I would probably sound like echoing Ritesh you as far as the macro travel trend is concerned. in the sense that, if I go back and read some of these newspapers, same time last year, the real estate, obituary was almost kind of being read by some of those analysts. And then I read about Diwali comes early, best time to invest in real estate. And there's a clear, enhancement of both supply and absorption. But I'll just take you through, obviously, taking on the asset class, residential being the largest. Now, residential as an asset class from an institutional investor, interest has not really seen. I mean, if we look at the logistics sector, which has attracted almost $6.5 billion of capital over the last few years, residential has received a trickle of that. And I think it may happen for some time, but there's a clear interest from the investors to really talk about that asset class. And the first barometer could really be the HNIs and the family offices looking at that as an asset class. And so I feel the residential at a macro level is there. I mean, the lowest interest rate or the mortgages side, the income to real estate index of 3.2x on a current basis, the prices being more of a stagnation phase in a long period of time. I think residential as an asset class is definitely being talked about, and that's a good first positive sign to look at. The government push is equally important in this entire story. So if you look at it, the government has come up with both demand and supply level push. So while we had a reduction in stamp duty, and I would have liked to see it for longer duration, but the 31st March 2021, the 31st December and 31st March 2021 timeline definitely pushed the people who were sitting on the fence and not taking a plunge on the residential asset class have definitely seen a enhanced sales because of the stamp duty reduction. On the supply side, the government also came up with these premium reduction schemes on August 19, 2021. One got over, another one getting 31st December 2021. Essentially, the 50% reduction in premiums is something which definitely has made the developers to apply for a certain waivers on their premiums, and therefore you will expect a larger launches of the supply. Now the office as an asset class, as ICICI Venture, we continue to be bullish on that segment. We believe that fundamentally, while we had a COVID impact on the asset class, but we do, and while if you take 2019 as an exception, as a country we absorb about 32 to 35 million square feet, and even in the 2020 at 24-25 million square feet, and this year at 28-29 million square feet, we would with almost a quarter lost. I think that's a fundamentally an asset class which will is resilient because of a limited segment of developers playing in that. Within the office asset class, we like, if you look specific to Mumbai, we like basically more of a front office, kind of a mid-segment office segment of about 200,000 to 500,000, because we believe there's a lack of graded developers in that space offering rated buildings. So these are the kind of asset class, residential and office, and we can move to warehousing and others as well. But I think these are the two fundamentally basic asset class which continue to be the core of real estate. Thanks.
Sure. Puneet, thanks for that. And Amit, if I get you in here, also when you look at the, we get a view from Ritesh and Puneet on the overall investment that have happened, and also some flavor on the asset classes. We'll delve deeper also in that from a data centers and warehousing point of view. But from a mix of funds, so like foreign fund share has visibly dropped, in the first half of 2021. Compared to what we were having earlier, so almost like a 20% drop has happened. But at the same time, domestic institutions have also stepped up, their investments around it. So how do you see this trend, and how do you read it for the next 6 to 18 months?
Thanks, Neeraj. Am I audible to you, Neeraj?
Yes, thank you.
So thank you again, and to reflect Puneet's sentiment, again, an extraordinary pleasure to be amongst friends and colleagues who have known each other for a very, very long time. So it's a pleasure to be on Realty Plus's platform again. I think the bulk of the sentiment has been truly captured, Neeraj, starting off from you, where you mentioned that over $3 billion have already come in, and 40% has been for Mumbai. And while Ritesh has been cautiously optimistic, he's a defensive guy, but I think the facts are slightly more encouraging for me, because if you look at purely from the fundamentals of the market, and the realty index is 2x of last year, and historically at its peak. For the first time, there's always been a conflict between stock investors and real estate investors where each are pitted against each other on which is the better asset class. But for the first time, we're seeing more stock analysts and stock watchers actually saying that real estate is a great asset class to get into. I think that is a fantastic thing to happen. We're likely to see more IPOs of real estate companies and more REITs getting listed over the next 12 to 18 months, since you talk about that period, Neeraj. So I think there is enough and more capital which is likely to come up, and maybe it will end up topping historical FDI and institutional investments for real estate in India. I think that's my first view. Second is, if you purely look at it from a micro perspective, and more specifically for Mumbai, I think we've seen over 100% quarter-on-quarter growth on residential sales compared to last year. Of course, last year being an anomaly to that extent, but even if you compare it to the 2019 numbers, we've actually exceeded the sales of 2019. I think that itself is a very, very interesting situation to be in. If you look at the per ticket investment, which was typically about 1 crore for Mumbai, has actually risen to about 1.5 crores, which means there's been an average increase of 50% on the ticket size, and overall demand increase, which has been, as I said, quarter to quarter between 128% to 188%, depending on which quarter one is looking at. So clearly, I think that's a fantastic number, and I don't see it actually abating. There was a lot of fear factor that all these stimuluses, like Puneet mentioned about stamp duty cuts, etc., will actually be the only driver for this demand. But clearly, it has not been. Even subsequent quarters have actually shown up bigger numbers. So clearly, I think it is not led by stimuluses alone. It is led by a very fundamental demand driver. And as Ritesh also mentioned, we're hearing some very large ticket transactions being announced almost every day by individual buyers, something we haven't heard in a very long time. So if you look at it purely from a decadal perspective, I think we're seeing the largest amount of absorption in the last 10 years. We're seeing the lowest interest rate in the last 10 years. We're seeing the maximum amount of increase in prices in the last 10 years, more or less. We're seeing the lowest inventory overhang in the last 10 years. Inventory overhang has actually come down to about 3 years from about 4.5 years in Mumbai. So we're seeing obviously a very huge absorption, which is taken off inventory. We're seeing very robust launches, almost 40% increase in launches. And of course, a lot of unannounced deals, like Ritesh having bought the next $10 million home, is still to be announced. But I think that's so notwithstanding private data, we're having a lot of interest, I think, coming in for Mumbai, and more specifically because it is a lagging indicator to the stock market. It has always been. So stock market gains and performance of the have always benefited Mumbai, which is why I think today Mumbai is actually the bellwether for residential real estate in India. So, which is why it is corroborated with the total investment that is happening, in Mumbai alone compared to the rest of the cities. So, and it is not just in residential, to supplement what Puneet and Ritesh mentioned, I think phenomenal interest in data centers. You also alluded to the fact that there's a doubling of demand in data centers, so from what was close to about 500 megawatts is going to be above 1,000 megawatts potentially within this year itself, and likewise for commercial and likewise for warehousing. So I think Mumbai is sitting in one of the most strongest geographic and sectoral positions as far as real estate itself is concerned. And we're very, very bullish about it. There's a lot of liquidity in the city. There's a lot of demand which has been coming. And interestingly, these ticket sizes are not now limited to central and south Mumbai alone. We're seeing very large ticket sizes actually being transacted in the central and western suburbs of Mumbai itself, which are otherwise considered affordable to mid-income housing geographies and micro markets. So we're seeing very good traction, whether it's Thane, whether it's Kanjurmarg, whether it's Powai, whether it's other markets in and around that. I think it's and of course western suburbs of Borivali, Kandivali, etc. So clearly across the western, central, and peripheral areas, we're seeing huge amount of traction, both in terms of demand as well as investments and launches, which has also led to a lot of developers from outside the city, which has traditionally not been the case, actually walk into the city and start launching projects. So you've seen a few Bangalore developers recently launch a slew of projects in Mumbai. So clearly Mumbai is offering one of the best diversification opportunities for out of city developers, given the resilience and the robustness of the demand. So I actually think that we've just seen the trailer to the blockbuster post-COVID lockdowns, and I think the next 12 to 18 months will actually reveal the real picture, which is, I think, a very, very huge and upside story. The amount of money flow actually is not less, because if you see the internal accruals for residential is very high. So even if residential got 30% of the total in institutional or FDI investments, the internal accruals have been very robust. Also, remember that a lot of the folks here, including Ritesh, me, and Puneet, we've, and some of the other domestic and funds have raised over $1 billion in capital, in the last, preceding quarters alone, to be invested in real estate. On top of that, there's Swami Fund. There's a lot of resolution happening in NCLT of very, very large portfolios, which is again going to throw up a lot of capital and a lot of supply and a lot of absorption, especially in NCR, Mumbai, and then Bangalore and Pune. So clearly, I think, if you look at it purely from a sum of internal accruals plus investments plus, new capital, both domestic and institutional, I think we're in one of the most strongest capital flow position that we've ever been in the last 10 years for residential specifically. Commercial, of course, there was a lot of concern whether it will continue to have a negative outlook given the work from home sentiments. But I think, everybody who believed in it has been proven right, that it continues to be one of the strongest and most, well-regarded asset class even today from an institutional investment perspective. And the capital flows will continue to be robust around that. So clearly a very huge upside as far as demand and development for commercial asset classes in Mumbai concerned. And of course, I collaborate with Puneet, where maybe we will not have the 2 million square feet type of developments going forward, because we're looking at a more core and flex type of strategies. Everybody's looking at continued core and flex strategies, which means there'll be smaller templates, but a larger mushrooming of such developments in the city. Otherwise, we've been limited to certain micro markets. But I've seen that commercial developments are now actually proliferating across new micro markets as well, with smaller development sizes now also being favored by institutional occupiers. So again, a very, very interesting opportunity and trend, because that allows even some of the mid-market operators to start getting into or re-entering commercial development, which they had exited, and it was left to, very, very limited, less than a dozen players nationally, is actually throwing up opportunities for mid players to also enter that space. So again, I think it's a very interesting story which is unraveling itself. Also, if you look at from a macro perspective, again, you will agree that, Neeraj, India has got a positive outlook. The sovereign rating of India has been re-rated to stable from negative. The cost of borrowing have significantly come down. Case in point being the recent refinance from 9% to about 6%. And I thought that was extraordinary. A domestic rupee denominated REIT being able to raise money at about 6.9% or 6.3%, I think is a phenomenal validation of the fact that good commercial real estate can get one of the cheapest capital in the country. So I think that is a phenomenal upside as far as the flow of capital itself is concerned. Therefore, in my view, the next 12 to 18 months is going to be a decadal situation, a lot of unlocking of stuck assets. Now, for example, the DHFL portfolio getting unlocked will result in a huge amount of capital and development and absorption getting accelerated in those projects, because they've all been, products which are ready for consumption, have had existing buyers. And therefore, in a project that starts off again, there will be obviously more traction, which was obviously missing because of stuck assets. So I think the resolution of stressed assets is going to be one of the other bigger drivers over the next 12 to 18 months, I think, for residential real estate specifically, in the larger story, which again is experiencing significant institutional interest, which may not be part of a normal bucket of capital that we track. Also, if you look at from a policy perspective, affordable rental housing complexes and some of the other new asset classes are again back in vogue. There's a lot of talk and a lot of development around that. So if you look at it purely from a stock development across asset classes, I think we're going to see a huge amount of construction activity come back. And we're obviously seeing that in the valuation of some of the contracting and material firms in the country. So, I think there may be also a huge amount of benefit coming out of the issues of China. So I think what we are still to experience is the inflows which are going to get reallocated from China to India, because clearly China was the largest beneficiary of capital inflows and consumption of materials in Asia. Now, if that is going to stop or halt or pause for some time, India is obviously going to be one of the largest beneficiary of that. I think that story is also likely to play out in the next 12 months in a bigger way. So if you
Sure.
look at it from an
So-
international to micro perspective, I only see upsides coming our way, Neeraj, and therefore, I think we're at the cusp of one of the largest stories unraveling for real estate and for all of us than that we've seen, in the last 10 years of our life cycles.
Sure. Thanks, Amit, for that wide-ranging and also a comprehensive view across different asset classes. And I think you touched upon residential real estate more significantly. So while I was planning to kind of come to that later, but let me just kind of cross that out now. So Jayesh, if I bring you in here, like what Amit mentioned as well, that the residential real estate sector is kind of witnessing a strong revival, low interest rates, also the home ownership sentiments also which have come about with COVID. That's kind of is in some ways driving the demand around it. But as we kind of reopen the economy, do you foresee any like tightening of the interest rates? And from a liquidity perspective, do you see that there are certain specific challenges which could come up there?
Thank you very much, Neeraj, and the Realty Plus for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts. And thanks to all, I would say, all my friends who gave their, I would say, a comprehensive view about the real estate sector. Your point is very right that residential sector is, I think, one of the major, I would say, the driver as far as the real estate sector is concerned. And we have seen for the decades that residential plays a very important role as far as the sector is concerned. And it drives the not only the consumption, but also drives what we call it as the investments as well. Now, Amit and Puneet and everybody said that, yes, there have been a lot of favorable demographics in terms of the policy changes, in terms of the reduction in the interest rates, in terms of the interest of the, I would say, the institutional investors and the domestic investors to invest into the residential and also a real estate sector. So there is a lot of, I would say, the positivity around the entire real estate sector. And there are a lot of, I would say, the upside that we could see as far as the real estate sector is concerned. Now, the question that has been coming up and is being debated, that whether the current interest rate of whatever that is being compressed for savings from, say, between 2 to 3%, and also for the construction lending that is going somewhere about, say, 8 to 9%. And Amit did mention that the institutional capital also is being made available or is being attracted at 6% as compared to what used to be 9% and 10%. So whether that trend will continue, I have, I would say, a question mark on that. I feel that that trend may not continue in the next 12 months. Possibly the rate of interest could go up from whatever the current level, and therefore that would create again pressure on the borrowing. So we don't expect that the borrowing rate would go down from, say, 6% to again, say, 4% or 5, but certainly it is going to go about 50 basis upwards in the next 12 months. So therefore, to that extent, there is going to be, I would say, pressure on the sector, and therefore one need to be mindful of that pressure in terms of, I would say, managing the cash flows and managing the cost of, I would say, the real estate investments and the real estate development.
Sure. Thanks, Jayesh, for that. So Ritesh, if I get you in, and Puneet, your views also on this, that that I mean, it's a topic which has got debated significantly in terms of that people wanting to work from home. There are a number of people from tier 2, tier 3 towns, which have actually moved to their home base and are not, in many places, are unwilling to kind of come back and join offices and the major cities around it. And companies are also trying to see that is there a hub and spoke model that they can come up with also within the city as well, large city like a Mumbai, given the locations, given the commute distance and challenges around it. Again, hub and spoke model within the location as well. And Puneet spoke about the fact that there is a sweet spot coming in between, let's say, 200K to 500K, like an office space. So how do you read this from a perspective of large office spaces? because in the past, like, there was a development which is happening significantly was in upwards of millions of square feet, and also take on of that space also by organizations were happening in that same manner. So, do you see, like, from the vacancies which are there right now and the kind of pattern which is coming up, how do you see this in the market, from the trend to go forward from an office use space point of view for large organizations?
Ritesh, you want to go first?
I was just going to say, Puneet, do you want to go first?
Okay.
पहले आप.
जैसे आप कहें वो भी आप जो कहें वही सही. Okay, so Neeraj, see, what I feel is that there's a big shift in terms of what the corporates would want to see going ahead. So there would be a clearly difference between the men's and boys in terms of the office as an asset class. So, the demand for even the tier B, companies which were basically comfortable with, let's say, a strata sold building or multiple floors, and they were okay with the building maintenance being low, they would want to have a certain larger focus now in terms of the health, quality, air index, of the properties. So therefore, there would be a certain expectation on the asset class on the office which would come in, which will look at the kind of a base expectation. Consolidation, instead of consolidation, I feel there would be multiple. They would prefer multiple offices in a single city, and that is another trend which would kind of witnessed on that particular front. And I think basically, while we have gone through it, I think and we are at least clearly seeing that the demand for office will come back. People would want to work it because, see, in India we have small homes. There even in the IT segment, there's a lot of sharing of these rooms. So it was fine till the point of time that you do not have the local infrastructure to take you to office because of the limitation there or because of the COVID impact. But the homes are not really designed in a manner to cater to the requirement from a long-term perspective. And therefore, I believe that there would be a back push by the companies to basically come for the employees to make them come back to the office. And even the employees are longing because the kind of culture and the inherent way we kind of work, I think it is also critical. There may be certain segments in the asset classes or in the industries where they could allow some people to kind of work on it. So there may be a little bit of hybrid structure, which is being talked about, but I don't think anyone knows the true ratio of hybrid versus office effectively. Should it be 80% office, 20% hybrid, 90-10, 15-85? I think the exact ratio, I think no one knows. Hot desking has been there in some of the companies even till pre-COVID, right? And I think that will continue to be there in some segment of industries where you would have a shared office space where someone would come take up the another space, and there would be a change in the design of offices also, I feel, going ahead, because over a period of time we were basically making offices smaller day by day, and then so while the de-densification may not really be there and we will forget, I think, over a period of time, hopefully the COVID impact, but the average space in terms of design, I think there would be a requirement to have a slightly larger space in terms of a lung space to kind of come in as well. So these are some inherent changes in terms of design and the way the corporates would look at it. But fundamentally, I'm bullish on office as an asset class, either from an outsourcing tech or even the basic growth of economy as a country.
Yeah, I will, Puneet has covered it beautifully, so not a lot to add from my perspective. I think, I agree with what he said about, the likely trend of people coming back to work in physical offices. I think if there was, I don't have an exact number, but let's say if there was 5% of the workforce pre-COVID, which was anyway working from outside, normal offices, working from home or wherever else, potentially that 5% is going to become 10% post-COVID. It's a significant move within 18 months. Would have taken 3 or 4 or 5 years in the normal course, but I don't think that that number is going from 5 to 30 or 40 or 50 for sure. And we're already seeing that the behavior change already happening. Companies are also keen to get people back. Most people are also wanting to come back, and there will be that small percentage of people who may not want to or may not be comfortable. And I think those are things that are part of life anyways. So I think from that perspective, maybe this sort of speed bump that the Indian office sector saw in the last 18 months was not such a bad thing. It's a space which has been going through a fairly robust upcycle for the last 7-8 years, 9 years. And, a little bit of pause, little bit of recalibration, little bit of rethinking, some change in behavior, both from corporates and from employees. And, then getting ready for the next phase, maybe 2022 onwards, is probably a good thing. It's one of those healthy, corrections or course corrections to sort of happen in any normal business cycle. So yeah, I think offices are here. They're here for the long run. They're only going to get bigger and bigger simply because the economic activity is going to be bigger and bigger. And there will be some design changes, policy changes because of COVID and some lingering behavior post that. At least I don't see some very dramatic, long-lasting change come through.
Sure. And if you could also, Ritesh, draw some perspective on the role the flexible office workspaces would play in that. Puneet did allude to the design change and also a bit on the flexible side, but if you could give a more color, what are you seeing in terms of the absorption, from the flexible office workspace perspective, and is that a trend which is catching up, for larger corporates to have more and more of such options being made available?
I think for sure, if one thing that COVID has taught us is to be, able to be nimble, to be able to move quickly, recalibrate and things like that. And I think for a certain type of company, for a certain size of company, having the flexibility of, modular office space, like pay as you use, or, ability to not commit to large sums of capital upfront, but pay like a service charge or so on, I think is invaluable and has proven to be invaluable, I would say, in the last 12-18 months also. So I think the whole industry around office space as a service, whether it's the WeWorks of the world or it's some of the other service providers, also for some of the organizations to take a little bit more flexible approach in terms of hot desking and so on and so forth. I think that's one trend that's here to stay for sure. Again, not sure WeWorks valuation has already sort of taken a reality check. So maybe what we were thinking or they were thinking 2 years ago compared to where we are now, we're probably in a far more realistic zone in terms of what is that change and what is the pace of that change. So I think it's a trend which is here to stay and will potentially keep sort of growing further.
Sure.
But Neeraj, I would like to add over here that we as human beings or as called Indians, we are a social animal. And we have experienced that, yes, it works very well to work from home. But beyond a point, it does not work. And we being social animal would like to, I would say, get out of our, I would say, the homes and meet people, work outside, get an experience, different experience altogether. So therefore, that push is already there. And at the same time, we also experience the, I would say, the negative impact of work from home also. So that also led people to, I would say, get out of the home and work from offices. So while the corporates may not go for what we call as the large formats or the consolidation, as Puneet mentioned, but the trend what we are going to see is more of what we call it as the flexible offices, where the corporates would like to have access to those flexible offices in whichever manner, whether it is a strata or whether it is what do you call it as a pay as you use kind of things, and different cities, so that the people are able to work and experience the, I would say, the environment, and also deliver what they have to deliver at the end of the day, and also meet with their social requirements. So what I see that the flexible office workspace is, I think, is going to be in more demand, and people would prefer that, because this is becoming more like, rather than real estate, it is becoming more like a service and the experience. So people are looking for an experience and the services. So therefore, the flexible office space, I think, would be the new opportunity for the developers as well as the investors.
Sure, sure. Now, of course, I think the organizations are kind of facing that issue in terms of the retaining the culture, building the new culture with the onboarding of the new employees as well. So I think it's like a rubber band which has been stretched enough already. With the 20 months now gone, so many organizations are really facing that with the high levels of attrition that one is facing there as well. So let's move on to the asset class from a warehousing perspective. And Puneet, you did touch a bit on that in your initial aspect of it. So if I may start with you and then come to Ahmed, in terms of we are seeing certainly an increase in demand from an e-commerce and third-party logistics players around it for the larger fulfillment centers, whether it's Amazon, whether it's Flipkart, there, and then there are a bunch of other retailers as well. But there's also a micro fulfillment centers requirement kind of coming in to say that you need to be more closer to the homes of the buyers, and also the fact to kind of reduce the delivery times around it. So when you look at the overall warehousing trend, for larger as well as smaller warehousing spaces to come up there, I mean, how do you see this trend, and how do you see this from a Mumbai region in particular?
Sure. So Neeraj, first of all, the demand for the organized warehousing has actually gone up by 43%. So effectively, just a few years back, it was primarily the unorganized segment. And there's enough capital, which I alluded earlier, which has got into or committed to the warehousing sector. Has it really seen the light of the day? I think there are certain practical challenges in terms of the larger land acquisitions and those, and therefore not all capital which got raised has seen the light of the day. So there's one clearly shift and a preference by warehousing operators to move to the organized segment. ESG, according to me, has become one of the key drivers for this capital raise, as well as on the at the compliance at the project level. So your floor to ceiling height, which was generally at 8-9 meters, is becoming 12-13 meters. Your strength of the floors, which could take up to the quality supply, something basic as a driver's rest area. The SNG, so to say, besides the E in the ESG is, I think, clearly deriving the preference towards that. I think I agree with you that it may not be single large consolidated segments, but there's definitely a paucity of a certain quality land supply which Mumbai faces when it comes to the warehousing segment. So I mean, you look at Bhiwandi as a certain micro market, and then you have a larger segment of warehousing, which majority of them are basically in the unorganized segment. So the newer destination needs to emerge in terms of the closer to the highway to have the warehousing hubs. The spoke model, which you alluded to, which is a smaller kind of a warehousing segment within the city or multiple thing, I think that is clearly kind of seeing the light of day, and it will only increase over a period of time. So I think there's one aspect of it, and interestingly, the cap rates of warehousing. So that's another barometer in terms of the family offices getting into investments into warehousing segment, which were hovering around 12.5%, 13%, has clearly come down to 8.5%, or in some quality cases even 8%. So 8.5% to, so let's say 8% to 9% has been really the cap rates currently, again showing a certain demand for a warehousing segment if you kind of build up on that basis. So from an overall segment perspective, I think it's a no-brainer at the pan India country level that the warehousing is here to stay. The organized warehousing is here to stay. The only challenges I alluded towards was actually quality deployment of capital and availability of quality land if you want to do a proper warehouse, which some of these larger players who have raised capital have definitely kind of faced that, and there are few who have basically been able to solve the puzzle, and therefore, but it's still yet to be seen.
Sure. And Amit, your quick comments on the warehousing sector, from Mumbai perspective, in particular, in terms of both large as well as from an organized, smaller side warehousing as well.
So Neeraj, to extend Puneet's argument, I think the demand is there, but obviously there are constraints in Mumbai which are larger compared to the other cities, given that it's an island city and therefore the land mass available for Mumbai closer to the city is limited and hence very expensive. We saw one of the most expensive auctions happen, wherein Dubai Ports had bid and acquired a very large land parcel, but hasn't really been developed thereafter. So while people have shown interest, and clearly Mumbai is a very large e-commerce center and a fulfillment center, I think the total development has been suboptimal in terms of supply versus demand. Notwithstanding that, also despite that, there has been a pressure on the rents. So wherein Bhiwandi had moved from almost 18 rupees to 28 rupees, I'm seeing some amount of downward pressure in that rent today, wherein I think there's a lot more conservatism in terms of the affordability of that space, given that logistics costs have otherwise gone up. And therefore, for 3PL players, I think there's a recalibration of the total value available for spaces within these centers. As far as the micro fulfillment centers are concerned, we've been seeing a lot of people talk about it. There's also been a few people who've been able to manage it. But again, this seem to be more on the unorganized space rather than the organized space, clearly because the total amount of investment required within infill and city locations is far greater, especially when you do a proper institutional asset with all the compliances and approvals and all of that. It becomes a far more expensive proposition. So we've seen demands at between 50 to 60 rupees a square foot, but that's not an easy asset class to acquire at that price band. Clearly, because it becomes unaffordable from the primary land and development cost perspective, and especially now post-COVID, where we've seen an uptick in the valuations again. I think last year there was some depression in the pricing of land and asset, but I think there has been now a recalibration again, where not only has the end stock pricing gone up, but corresponding the land and other development costs have also gone up. Hence new developments will tend to be slightly more expensive than what was budgeted last year. So I do continue to believe that while the outlook and the demand is robust, and Mumbai offers itself to great amount of development potential, but the actual amount of area being constructed and made available both from large consolidation centers to micro fulfillment centers will still be limited. And to that extent, Mumbai may not come out as a clear leader the way I'm seeing NCR come out, or I'm seeing peripheral areas of Bangalore and Chennai come out, or Hyderabad come out. For example, the entire Kundli, Manesar, Paliwal zone of NCR, or the Daruhera areas of NCR, just because of the sheer landmass and the pricing affordability, are seeing greater amount of development and traction than what Mumbai is able to witness. So I do see that as a constraint for the island city, but but in value terms, I think it will still be reasonably significant. So yeah, I mean, I continue to be bullish, but slightly more cautious on the Mumbai warehousing opportunity.
So Ritesh, if any a specific comment on the warehousing segment, and if you want to give any particular view, then we could take that. Otherwise, would like to kind of move to data centers. Given that in Mumbai, there is a significant increase in data centers expected. With by 2023, like from 200 to now 500 megawatt that we're trying to get to. So if you could kind of touch upon that aspect of it to say that why Mumbai as a data center hub is attractive compared to other locations, and why that would kind of continue to drive the demand for that. That would be helpful.
Sure. Just one comment, which is a macro comment on the warehousing space. So one data point is that every $1 billion of e-commerce sales creates demand for 1.3 million square foot of warehousing space. And in the Indian market, we are at some $30 odd billion in terms of e-commerce sales right now, projected to go to 100 billion in the next 3 years. Just that itself means another 100 million square foot of demand, and across this is of course pan India and so on and so forth. But I'm saying where we are seeing the warehousing space today is where offices used to be, I would say in 2012-13, where there was a fairly long sort of runway in front of the asset class in terms of new development, new occupants, the maturity of the market, and so on. And warehousing is obviously benefiting from the fact that real estate, the office segment, has already seen a great amount of evolution, maturity, deep expertise, both from developers as well as from financial investors. And that is actually going to now rub off on the warehousing sector as well. So I think it's a sector which is poised for fairly robust growth. Of course, there are constraints, like Amit mentioned, for Bombay, for example. But I think irrespective, where there is going to be demand, I'm sure entrepreneurs will find the solutions around those constraints as well. So that's on that. On data centers, I mean, I only have some generic comments. Similar to if e-commerce is going to grow so much, then data consumption is obviously going to grow. We've continued to have the cheapest data available across the world, thanks to Geo, and hence demand is growing exponentially. There is need for data centers to be set up domestically. There's also a increasing inward-looking view from most governments in terms of that India's data should remain in India and not be stored elsewhere, etc., etc. All of that is going to just add up, both the demand in terms of data usage as well as in terms of data storage. And Bombay, having I believe one of the two sort of undersea links as far as the internet connectivity is concerned, will then certainly see that that demand sort of come through. This is, in my view, not purely a real estate activity. This is a bit more than that. And we've engaged with some large players offshore to understand what they're looking at. And I think the whole understanding of the space, how to run it efficiently, and very importantly, how to get some of the clients, because at some level this is like office space as well, where if you have let's say a couple of the large IT players globally as your clients in the US, they might follow you in India as well. So I think some of those elements are also required for successful execution on this strategy. So I mean, I don't think this is for everyone, and hopefully only the specialized players with the right kind of technical expertise will get in. And without a doubt, I think the MMR region will see its share of data center development as well.
Sure, you rightly said. There is a strong interest from multiple developers. From a data center's point of view, given the kind of rise in the demand which has come about, and the fact that it will be sustained demand as well. So Puneet and Jayesh, your views on the data centers in terms of the certainly like what we've already discussed, that there'll be a doubling of the capacity very soon. The kind of requirement from real estate facility requirement will also come up on that, but then also it means more than a pure play on the real estate side. How do you see this, from participants in the industry taking like a stronger share of this opportunity? Puneet, first you, and then Jayesh.
Thanks, Neeraj. See, Neeraj, let me first admit that I do not understand the data center space that well, because of the fact that I think there's more to real estate to it. Even the quality of the real estate and the extent of requirements you need to build for a data center are not purely a real estate play. Right? I mean, right from the sourcing of the land, the power, the EPC part of it. So I think there's a still a bit of learning curve of board of developers who have basically talked about that. Okay, I have a land, and why don't I create a data center, because there can be a potential demand at the macro level. So I think there still needs to be a bit of science part of it which needs to be understood. So it would be good to have developers who want to venture into that space to have a right tie-ups with some of these larger players who understand this space. Globally, yes, data centers are here to stay. It will continue to drive the demand even at an India level. We have seen some of the very, very successful REITs, like I was reading of some time back about the Keppel REIT on the data center side, which has done phenomenally well. So having said that, I mean, I would say that I still have to go a bit of learning curve there, while I've engaged with some of the players who both internationally and domestically, but I feel that there's more to it that what really meets the eye. Thanks.
Sure. Jayesh, your views?
So I think Ritesh and Puneet rightly mentioned that the data center is basically a very niche sector and very specialized sector. So it is not like a real estate sector. So that the real estate player can say that I have got a land or I've got a property and I can convert that into a data center. It requires, I would say, a lot of specialized skills when one has to, I would say, build the data center. It's like, first of all, you need to have the power, you need to have the infrastructure, you need to have the connectivity. So there are a lot of factors which has gone to, and more importantly, I think from a data center point of view is a continuous connectivity that is very, very important. And the last most important point is the safety and the security of the data, because that's most important for any player who would like to, I would say, take the facility and avail the services. So this is more of, to my mind, is a services business, a specialized services business, as opposed to a real estate. So real estate is more of a, like what you call it as any facilitator. So if you compare it with like a hospitality sector, so real estate is just one part of the, I would say, the asset class, but the more to do with the, I would say, the various experiences the, I would say, the consumer or the user gets it. So that is very, very important. From a demand side, the data center, yes, certainly this is a very a huge opportunity, given, I would say, the digitization that is happening all across. In fact, as Ritesh said, that the government is also looking at inward from the data protection point of view, and the drive of the government in terms of the digital India, in terms of digitization of the all the, I would say, the processes, whether it comes to real estate, whether it comes to a revenue on GST side, on the income tax side, and even on the entrepreneur side also, there is a lot of, I would say, the digitization happening. So therefore, there is, I would say, influx of records which needs to be digitized, needs to be stored, which needs to be accessed at the touch of the button. So therefore, there is a huge demand for, and there is a huge requirement for the data center as far as India is concerned. India can also become a kind of a hub for the global players also to house the data. But the point again, I'm stressing that this is not, I would say, like any other residential, commercial, I would say, the product. It's a completely niche, and therefore one need to be very, very careful, mindful of, I would say, entering to this. So not that everybody can get into the data center business. So this is going to be a different play altogether.
Sure. Thanks very much. And then kind of we're coming towards the end of the session. So if I may ask that, why don't we just do like a minute each, from your asks, if I may say, starting Ritesh with you, then go to Amit, Puneet, and Jayesh, as you're on my screen, there from a perspective to see that, if you were to look at it, that, what is the 2 things or 3 things which you would say that, either the government should do, the industry should do, so that the industry becomes more broad-based. We have more investments coming in a more certain manner, there. And of course, if you would like to stress on a particular asset class, like, an office space or a residential, you can actually color that as well. But what would be your asks from the government and also, from the industry to make it more sustainable from a growth perspective there?
Sure. So, Dheeraj, I think my ask from the government is pretty standard. Stay out of business and just give us a consistent policy environment. I think, any institutional investor, any foreign investor, any domestic investor for that matter, who's looking at putting money into anything new, the one thing that they need is a stable, consistent policy approach. And I think, that's something that's, I would say, a prerequisite for capital to flow in. That's one. The second, I would say, is that, if governments, certainly the government of India, can focus on one particular aspect, which is, to do with the legal system, frankly, which is enforcing contracts. We rank nearly at the bottom of the list across the world in terms of the ability to enforce contracts. And I think that, irrespective of whatever our ranking in the now disbanded ease of business rankings would have been, I think the fact is that we were at like 175 or 180 as far as enforcement was concerned, and that, I think, is a total non-starter when you're looking at bringing capital in. The fact is that despite all that, there is so much capital coming in. Imagine if some of these things were in place, how much more we could have got and how much more economic activity could have taken place. Largely, I think from the government, that's the ask. From the entrepreneurs, from the operators in the business, from the developers, I would just say that, we've been through the school of hard knocks in the last 10, 12 years across sectors, right? Residential has seen its share, commercial in the last, 2 years or so. I think just a sort of better standard of doing business, better standards in terms of dealing with customers, dealing with counterparties and so on. We've already got a few developers who are doing that, and it's very clear, how the listed market is rewarding them. And even how institutional investors are rewarding them. I think it'd be great if we could uplift the entire sector by a few notches with better behavior. That's it. Not too much to ask.
So with that, not too much to ask, Amit, if I get you in as well, to add on to the.
No, certainly. Just to add to what Ritesh mentioned, purely from a financial services perspective, I mean, I think there's a huge amount of opportunity, since you talked about what is going to drive more money. And money is both, either you look at it from a domestic perspective or from an offshore or FDI perspective. I think from a domestic perspective, the first thing would be to create a robust framework for tokenization or unitization of the real estate. I think we've seen some amount of traction now as far as Strata or HBits or some of these Strata or token players getting capital traction and interest in broader markets. And if that can be actually made into a significant asset class through better regulatory framework, because there's a lot of dichotomy on whether they would be under CIS or AIF or some other regulation, and which is the best way to actually make that available and make it robust, so that there is some amount of governance also around these asset classes, the way REITs are being governed in terms of retail participation into commercial real estate. So if that same can be extended to the e-commerce platforms, I think that will bring in a huge amount of retail participation, which necessarily not can happen in REITs because the float is not that great, or domestic float or retail float is not that great. I think that's the first part. The second part is when it comes to FDI. You said that FDI in ready assets is really limited to commercial. If it can be also made for residential, where a lot of the unsold inventory can be held, managed and operated as managed residences by foreign capital, I think that brings another opportunity to liquidate that inventory and make it into managed assets also by institutional investors. That is a huge opportunity right there, because we do have a still an persistent inventory overhang. Third, in terms of resolution of assets, I think there needs to be better regulatory guidelines when it comes to owning or transferring or acquiring loan assets by AI funds. Clearly, I think new capital formation is not necessarily happening for real estate through NBFCs, but more through funds or offshore capital. And if there is a way for offshore capital directly or through AI funds to acquire these assets, loan assets from banks or other NBFCs, I think that will obviously open up a huge opportunity as well for new capital to come up and take over all the stressed assets loans from the hands of the current holders of these assets, which will again free up a lot more new capital to go back into the sector. So I think that's the third thing I would ask from a regulatory perspective. Fourth, of course, is the entire strengthening of the regulator itself, which is RERA. We've seen 5 years of RERA, and I think RERA itself has been a great game changer, but it is limited to certain states alone. Whether you talk about Maharashtra or Gujarat or a few other spaces. Now, fortunately, because of judicial intervention, West Bengal is falling in line. But again, still, it is not seen as a assurance model for a very large consumer space. People are still, held back in terms of RERA not being a empowered regulator to be able to, dictate across stakeholders, not just the developer, not just the consumer, but across stakeholders, including government agencies, etc. So I think that would be a very important point where RERA needs to be strengthened, more resources need to be provided, and it needs to be one of the final, it needs to come to the level where SEBI or RBI is, in my view. I think it's just a shadow of that. So for it to become significant, the way capital markets became significant, the regulator will have to become very, very significant and standard across the board. So I think that's a very, very large missing piece. And finally, if you look at from a resolution perspective, I think we may need a separate tribunal. I think we have too many regulatory or too many judicial bodies for real estate, whether it's NCLT, whether it's Supreme Court suddenly stepping in, High Court stepping in, RERA stepping in, Consumer Forum stepping in. So there needs to be one tribunal which is linked to RERA, which can be a resolution tribunal, wherein it could have maybe even the NCLT part to it, because the complexity of resolution in NCLT or under IBC for housing is far greater than any other asset class in front of IBC. Just because of home buyers also being a financial creditor, apart from other issues and other stakeholders involved. So because there's domestic institutions, there is state bodies, local bodies, too many parties. So I think a resolution mechanism through a single tribunal, I think, will again be a game changer for the sector when new capital can come in. So these would be my simple 5 asks again.
Sure. So in the interest of time, I'll just quickly move to Puneet and Jayesh. If you could just give a quick comment on your ask from the government, if there's any violent disagreement with what's been said so far, that is something you could highlight as well.
Just a quick one. I think the more things change, the more things remain the same. This was a ask probably when I started my career, and I've been heard it during my FDI days, post FDI days, just a consistency in the policy. And Amit alluded towards a more robustness on maybe a single window clearance in terms of approvals or basically resolutions. So I think I would just there. But having said that, fundamentally, I think I'm pretty bullish in terms of the fact that the government came up with all these steps, and a lot of these steps are in the last few years, whether it was easing of the FDI, whether it was bringing in the RERA and all those REITs is a last 2-3 years old phenomena. So effectively, I continue to be optimistic, I would say, when it comes to the government, because it seems to be on that side, and that's all from my end.
Sure. Thanks, Puneet, for that. Jayesh, very quickly, your comment.
From my side, very quickly, I think now Amit covered whatever point that I wanted to cover. But yes, certainly the real estate sector is very complex. So we need more, I would say, the governance, less government. So that's very important. The tokenization and I would say the democratization of real estate is the new, I would say, the trend, and therefore the government should come out with a very robust regulatory framework to facilitate and support the tokenization of the real estate, whether it is commercial, whether it is residential or any other asset class, because there is a huge opportunity around that. And thirdly, from a, I would say, the developer standpoint or the key stakeholder point of view, I have been always saying that people have to take it as an industry. This is an industry, and therefore people have to develop the industrious mindset, bring in the governance, transparency, and everything. I think then everything will fall in place.
Sure. Thanks very much, gentlemen. I mean, it's been engaging and a very insightful discussion with all of you. We're just at the, out of the limit now from a time perspective. So I'll just quickly say that, thanks very much to all of you, and also the fact that I think this is one of the most exciting times in the sector today. Wherein we've seen the largest component of the sector, the residential real estate sector, which has been lagging behind with the overall inventory overhang and also the challenges that we were seeing. But I think with the demand returning, we're seeing so much of buoyancy right now, in terms of the sales aspect of it, which is a very, very welcome side of it. Of course, we've seen the challenges on the commercial office real estate, which was spoken at length in the discussion today as well. That is something which is a phenomenon that we are all experiencing. But at the same time, it's not something which is, as Ritesh said, it's a blip there. And as Puneet said, it will differentiate men with boys, there. So I would kind of go with that. And I think one thing which resonates with me when you said, like, what Ritesh said, and Puneet also said it in terms of the fact that a predictable regime from the government, the consistency in policy is what we're looking at, and the fact that the government will stay out of business, as an overall theme, that is something which will augur very well for the sector. So, gentlemen, wish you all very best, and thank you again for your time. Thank you, Realty Plus, Sapna. Always a pleasure to be with you, and get this opportunity to listen, share, and also to understand different views. Thank you.
Thanks, Neeraj, for asking the right questions and getting the honest opinions. But as going by what our speakers have to say is the time is right, as you rightly mentioned. It's very interesting times and investments are growing. Dr. Hiranandani was here with us earlier, and he was very optimistic and very positive the way the economy is going, the way the stock market is going. So this is, the real estate is is going to be one of the fundamental pillars of the economy going forward. So great times, and we are going to see brilliant real estate going forward. So thank you to all our speakers for sharing their views and opinions and giving us, the real story, the real perspective of how the investments and the finances happening in the real estate sector. So thanks, Neeraj, for that wonderful moderation. Thanks, Mr. Ritesh Hora, for being here with us. Amit Goenka giving your opinion and views. Mr. Puneet Bhatia sharing your perspective, and Jayesh, thank you so much for being here with us on this panel. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sapna.
Thank you.
Thank you, Neeraj.